Lindsey Jesionowski, author of Shut Up and Dance, comes out tomorrow. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk with me and our viewers at Studio 4. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited. It's been just so much fun to, get this out there, and I'm so happy to talk with you.
Anytime you get to release a new book, there's a ton of feeling and some jitters and some butterflies in the stomach. How is this release different than your past two? Have you learned a little bit about the process coming into your third book?
I've learned a lot. I'm still learning. I will still continue to learn because as I'm, getting things ready for this one, I'm looking back and thinking, oh, I probably should have done this differently. So I have a whole list of things, to change for next time. But I have a list that I'm going off of from things that I learned last time. So I think for me right now, just kind of knowing the process a little better helps. But still, it's, every book is different. And so every way you market it and talk about it's different. So obviously that changes, but I feel more prepared this time. Not totally prepared, but I feel much more prepared than the previous two launches. So that helps.
One thing I really love about your series is that even though it's a series and these characters are interconnected, you can read each one individually. So whenever you're creating, characters in, let's say, like in book 2, we get introduced to Johnny and we see Angie, and who take the main stage in book 3. Do you set up those plot points on purpose, in the previous book to come to the next book to explore that?
So for my first book, Alone Together, I didn't. Like, that was just going to be one book that I wrote. And then about a third of the way through it, the side characters who are the main characters in Shut Up and Dance kind of started, I don't know, talking to me, which sounds kind of crazy, but it was true. And I thought these two would make a fun book. So from there on out, that was my mission to, as I'm introducing new characters, to kind of, establish that relationship so that people may have interest to read in the future. But when I started, I didn't intend, because Alone Together was just going to be a standalone, a one book. And then I didn't really have a plan after that until I started drafting, and plans just started coming. So kind of establishing those relationships is kind of fun, because then you have a taste of, that character and how they relate and how they react to things. And then it kind of, just pivots right into their story. So you have that bit of foundation already set, which is fun for the writer. And I think for the readers too, because they feel like they already kind of know these people.
When coming off of Alone Together and Mishaps and Mistletoe, coming into Shut Up and Dance, your third book in this series, how did your plotting process change writing?
It changed a lot because I didn't plot Alone Together, and it showed, because I rewrote that book so many times. By the time I was finished with it, I was like, I don't want to see it anymore. Like I had lived that book. And so that's a mistake that I'll never make again. I know a lot of people can just sit down and pants a novel. I learned very early that I'm not one of those. So when I wrote Mishaps and Mistletoe, I had an outline, and that made it so much easier to write, number one. But then also I could kind of weave these little Easter eggs throughout the story that I think if I hadn't sat down and thought about it beforehand, it wouldn't have happened. And so I think that makes it fun. But also when you have a series, you kind of have to watch. And I know I said I read Alone Together and rewrote it, 100 times, but there has to be some fact checking involved. And so I feel like, outlining helps me keep my stuff in order, because otherwise, there's a lot you forget from one book to the next. And if you don't kind of have a plan in place, I feel like it's very easy to mess things up. And readers know, like they know my books, I think, better than I do, once I move on to the next. So like, Lindsey, this person's hair was this color in this story. And I don't want that to happen. Or, somebody reacts a certain way in the first story as a side character, and then their personality changes in the next. You can't have that. So I think that for me, plotting a story and outlining it has been just as important for the story I'm writing, but as the series as a whole. So
as you continue your series, do you have any plans for coming next? What happens after Shut Up and Dance? And these two characters, are there offshoot characters from this one that are going to have their own story?
Yes, there are.
Okay.
So there's a couple that was introduced in Shut Up and Dance. They will get their own story, but they're not next. There is one character that you haven't met his love interest yet, but that'll be the next story. And then another one after that. And I'm kicking around the idea for yet another story. So that would make 6 in the series.
Yeah.
Definitely 5. But again, a character's kind of talking to me, as I was writing this, and I hadn't really thought of this person as a lead, but as I was writing she stood out to me. So I'm thinking she might get her own story.
As a writer myself, because I know this happens, it always fascinates me also as a reader when an author talks about how a character speaks to them, literally talks to them through their words as they're writing. How do your characters speak to you, and how does that form emotional attachments with, inter characters, as well as how they react to things going forward?
I think characters speak to me a lot through dialogue and how they help their characters. So for Johnny, for instance, the main character in Shut Up and Dance was the main character's best friend in my first book. And I think he started speaking to me just as he was just being himself through what he said to his best friend, how they reacted, and just his general goofiness. So that was something that, I started to explore. I'm like, why is he so funny? What is he hiding? What is, what's going on? And so I think that's how he spoke to me. And Angie, the main character, the female main character in Shut Up and Dance, was Hannah's best friend from Alone Together. And she also very no nonsense, very, blunt, which is kind of the opposite of Johnny. And so as, I was writing them, I was like, oh, this could be fun. So the whole enemies to lovers kind of, spawned from that. But I think just letting characters, I have a very clear plan when I'm writing, as I said, when I'm outlining the main characters. I would say the side characters, I kind of let them be a bit and just, see how they naturally, move into the story. And I think giving them space to breathe is kind of how they talk to me, because then I'm able to see, okay, how would they react, and then pivot from that to another story. So
one of my favorite things about your books is your dialogue and how witty you are. Who are some of the authors that you have studied, maybe emulated a little bit to learn how to write such engaging dialogue?
I would say there are 2 main ones. The one is Abby Jimenez. She writes dialogue like I wish I could write dialogue like she does. And what's funny is I remember it was either in an interview or I read it somewhere that she said, starting out that dialogue was her thing. And so when she wrote Happily Ever After Playlist, she relied heavily on dialogue. And I had already read that book and I was like, she's good. I mean, that's it. So I knew when I started writing Alone Together, my dialogue was terrible. It felt like very robots and, artificial intelligence kind of, it was terrible. So I reread her books again just to kind of get that feel. How does she make it so natural? So that was huge. And Lyssa Kay Adams, I like her dialogue as well. I mean, she just funny, witty, but it also makes sense because I think for me, what made me better with dialogue was reading it out loud. And so that's how I knew in Alone Together, the first few drafts, that the dialogue wasn't very good, because I'm like, no one would actually talk like this. This isn't, I come from a background. I was a creative writing literature teacher and a very formal, structured writing. And that's not what this is. So I had to kind of learn to loosen up a bit. And I would say those 2 authors are hands down just brilliant at what they do, particularly dialogue.
Wonderful. Lindsey, where can our viewers find your new book, Shut Up and Dance?
They can find me on Amazon. I'm also at a local indie bookstore, the Little Green Bookstore in Zelienople, Pennsylvania. You can Google them. You can order from there. I am also, you can get signed copies from the Porter Cove Bookshop. So you can follow me on Instagram, author Lindsey Jesionowski, and I have all the information there if you want an autographed copy.
And for the Studio 4 viewers, even though I literally just did this on air, can you give them a synopsis of your new book, Shut Up and Dance?
So we have these 2 characters who don't like each other. Angie's new in town and she can't stand Johnny. They had a meeting a little while ago. And basically, she has volunteered to teach these charity ballroom dance classes, and her partner has gotten injured. And Johnny is just wanting them to get along because their two best friends are marrying each other and they're going to be in each other's lives. And so he says that he's a ballroom dancer and he will step in and help. He is not a ballroom dancer, but he's going to play one. So they get together and they're having these, dances, and she's not really happy about it, but it's fun to watch them go from, okay, I can tolerate you, to maybe I more than tolerate you. And as much as they're fighting what they're feeling, we'll just have to read the rest and see.
And they don't call it happy ever after for nothing.
That's true.
Before I let you go, I do have to tell you some of my favorite scenes in the book are the three guys learning how to ballroom dance, or teach Johnny how to ballroom dance.
Yes.
So
because
much fun.
Johnny, obviously he lied and said he could ballroom dance, and they're trying to teach him. And the Bro Room Dance Club.
Yes.
It was, those were some funny scenes to write.
I think you could write an entire book just on that.
I would love to. It was, those scenes, they, so often you sit down and you're writing something and I'm like, well, people think this is as funny as I think it is. I'm like, I don't care. I'm just writing it because it was a hoot. So I really enjoyed it.
Lindsey, thank you so much for your time today. I know I appreciate it. Our viewers at Studio 4 appreciate it. And we will see you later.
Thanks for having me.
Happy publishing.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.